Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Thursday edition of Video Clips. And I'll remind you that if you are interested in careers, it would be a good idea to email me at pampopper@msn.com, because some classes start next week and some start the week after, and this is the time to have some conversation about it. As much as I love the last minute, and we're pretty good at dealing with things at the last minute. If we could avoid some of that, that would be pretty amazing. So pampopper@msn.com, I'll send you some information, and then we can also schedule a time to talk if you would like as well. All right. So here's what I want to talk about today. In another attempt to scare people, there is a whole lot of talk right now about SARS-CoV-2 mutating. Of course, this has to be bad, and many people have seen some science fiction movie where a quick mutation in a virus wipes out half of a continent of people, and it just everything is catastrophized in this whole thing. And it's one of the problems I have with this whole approach to everything. I mean, I don't think that the job of public health is to lie to people in the interest of keeping them calm, but people are being told false things in the interest of keeping them panicked. And I just don't understand how anybody can justify that in the interest of public health, right? But this viral mutation thing is not as scary as you might think. All viruses mutate. Scientists and researchers know this, and they know that it's generally not a cause to be concerned. Changes in a virus's genetic makeup are to be expected. They take place regularly, not just once, but several times, unless it's 2020 to 2021, and then panic is the order of the day. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of this mutation issue, and then I'll create a longer article, which I'll put in the Forbidden newsletter. So let's start with some viral basics. Viruses are just protein shells that contain either DNA or RNA as their genetic material. SARS-CoV-2 is an RNA virus. The building blocks of RNA are called nucleotides, and about 30,000 of them make up SARS-CoV-2, and they're arranged in groups of 3 called codons. A mutation is a change to just one of those 30,000 nucleotides in the virus's genetic material. And so the odds that a single change or even several of them is going to be something horrific is not real great, because most of those 30,000 nucleotides are pretty innocuous. Now, sometimes a mutation in a triplet is silent, meaning the codon still codes for the same amino acid, but even if that amino acid and the protein that it's a component of changes, it may not make any difference in the way that the virus behaves. Now, epidemiologists, among many things that they do, they track strains of viruses, but even this can be a little bit confusing. When scientists talk about a different strain, they can sometimes be referring to a virus that isn't genetically identical, but it isn't different in any meaningful kind of way. And under normal circumstances, and gosh, we don't live in normal times, this would be addressed in a much more genuine way or truthful way. So I mentioned before, it's a fact of life. Viruses are always changing. When a virus infects a cell, it begins making copies of its genetic instructions. Most viruses don't have the, let's call them proofreading skills, to look at each strand for mistakes. But as it turns out, coronaviruses like SARS-CoV-2 actually do have a proofreading enzyme, which is kind of a rarity. But it doesn't mean that you won't have errors. Changes still accumulate, but just a little bit more slowly. And so strains and variances and lineages are all kinds of terms that people use, and you just shouldn't be frightened when you hear these kinds of terms. So when people hear the term strain, I think what they think is it must be some whole new pandemic. And that's, of course, the impression that people want to give you. There's a whole new pandemic starting. Oh my gosh, it's going to be like March all over again. Well, March wasn't all that eventful if you go back and look at the data. But aside from that, it doesn't start all over again. It doesn't necessarily mean that something is more dangerous. A mutation can affect a virus in many different ways, but only certain kinds of mutations would make the virus dangerous. I mean, sometimes the change shields the virus from the immune system or makes it a little resistant to treatments, but and mutations can alter how how fast the virus is transmitted, which again sounds scary, but doesn't necessarily need to be, because what really we should be focusing on is the fatality rate, and we're focusing on cases, and just everything about this has been pretty mismanaged. Now, I think that I want to say again, the mutations that are serious, that could be very concerning to everybody, including me, are very rare. So I don't want you to hear that term and just immediately go off the deep end into panic. Now, I thought this was interesting. Back in May of 2020, a mutation was found in the SARS-CoV-2 spike. That's the protein on the outside of the coronavirus that gets it into the cell easily. This new variant is found more often in places like Europe and the United States than the original form of the coronavirus, but still, at this point in time, and it's months and months later, there isn't any reason for anybody to be worried about it. But here's, I guess, the main point I want to get to, is this variant, this mutation was discovered in May, okay? The virus was mutating in May. You're just hearing about mutations right now because there's a need to continue to frighten people. Another thing, and I'll correct a false statement here that's being said, is that vaccines will keep the virus from mutating. If you have a medical school textbook at home, I have a lot of them in my house, you can check that out. It's patently false, and it's coming from people who are supposed to be the geniuses about all of this. So you might know who I'm talking about here. But in any case, the vaccine won't prevent the virus from mutating at all. In fact, the vaccine may promote more mutations for a variety of reasons. But the take-home point is, A, all viruses mutate. In the case of SARS-CoV-2, it started mutating almost immediately. We have an example of mutation in the spike protein in May. The third thing is you're not going to stop it from mutating. The fourth thing is that it's almost always a meaningless mutation. And by the way, another thing that I'll mention to you is that viruses are parasitic. They can't really exist unless they can infect living creatures. So they're not particularly interested in killing living creatures. It's usually just the vulnerable, the highly vulnerable, who die of a virus. So anyway, hope that clarifies some of this, makes you sleep a little bit better tonight if you are concerned about it. As usual, pass this on to anybody who you think would enjoy learning more about this interesting time we live in, and I'll be back to you tomorrow with more news.